Hello, I'm Bonnie Ward-Simon, President and Executive Producer of Maestro Classics. And today I would like to introduce Sharon Yamada. Sharon is a violinist with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Can we go back a long way in time?
Mm-hmm.
How old were you when you began to play?
I was around 3.5 years old. I have my parents to thank for just having art and music around us growing up. So they're not musicians, but they had an appreciation for it. So it was a gift that they gave my sister and brother and me.
Did your sister and brother also play?
Yes.
Are you the oldest?
I am the oldest.
Okay, so you began?
I began it.
Yes.
And then my sister had piano lessons and my brother had cello lessons. So at one point we even did play as a piano trio.
Were you part of the Suzuki method?
Actually, I was not. I did have a Suzuki violin, which is the tiniest one they had. Is
it's
16.
Like a 16th size.
Yes, you can.
Oh my gosh!
They're really, really cute, and it's hard to make a lot of sound on that. But it's almost like a Christmas ornament size. Okay, so then the hunt for a violin teacher began, and my mom did as everyone did back then. She let her fingers do the walking through the yellow pages. And she found a violin shop not too far from our house, in town LA. Yeah.
Okay.
And found a woman, Mrs. Hartwell, who lived a block away from me. And I studied with her for that first year. She was such a warm and wonderful older woman and just loved the violin. She made it about having fun. We would sit back to back and she would play something and I would have to try to imitate those and find those sounds. In the beginning, this thing is like a toy. It's just something new to do. And I was kind of an obedient child, so I did what I was told and I kept with it. And practicing at that point is not really heavy.
Really, you were lucky to have such a wonderful teacher who made it fun.
Yes.
Did you ever play any other instrument, or was it violin from the get-go?
It was violin from the get-go. I had maybe a year of piano later on when my sister started, and I was kind of fascinated with trying to play the piano, but it was so different than the violin. And I didn't get very far, but it was a good introduction to that. There was always music playing in the house, in the car, Los Angeles being the driving culture that it is. We had the radio on, and my mom had it on the classical station because she had an appreciation for operas and symphonies and concertos, and a lot of the time in the car she would say, "Who's this composer?" And she could teach us, even though she wasn't musically trained, but she knew, as a listener, she had gotten to know some repertoire.
Did you play in school orchestras as you were growing up?
In grade school, there wasn't an opportunity for that for where I was, but I did in middle school and high school have chamber music, and also joined the Young Musicians Foundation debut orchestra as for several years as the local youth orchestra.
Now, I know you went to Yale. Did you study music there, or did you study something else there?
I definitely studied music, and I thought I was going to be a music major. I kind of used my college liberal arts time to really think about whether I wanted to really stay in music full time, because I had been on this very concentrated road all the time. I somehow got into the architecture major. I was so interested in it. I loved it, and yet I was still pulled back to the violin.
So you had a choice, but when the road divided, you knew that music was going to be it.
Yes.
You play with the New York Philharmonic now, but was that your first professional job?
No, it wasn't my first. You have to have experience. So, there were a lot of student orchestras. I went to Aspen in the summer. In college, I also managed to get into the New Haven Symphony. That was my first job, and I actually had second chair there, which was really a great experience.
What is it like to audition for a major symphony orchestra?
So, you have to prepare symphonies or orchestral repertoire, as well as a couple of solo repertoire choices. First of all, you have to play behind a screen. There's a carpet, actually.
High heels?
High heels being recognizable.
Yes.
And, I would cut down on the bias aspect of a fair audition. And I learned how to take auditions by doing them.
Now, I've noticed that there are many more females in, especially the string sections, but in orchestras in general. And I've always wondered whether that change began when they started playing behind a screen, auditioning behind a screen.
I must say it has something to do with it, for sure. And I remember when I got into the orchestra, I think the percentage was maybe less than 1/4 women. And now it's about 50-50.
Now, who sits in on these auditions?
A committee made up of a variety of positions in the orchestra, probably from the section, for which that audition is, being run.
How many concerts a year do you play with the New York Philharmonic?
We do 4 concerts a week of the same program.
Okay.
So our timetable is pretty,
It's
a
pretty
quick,
intense.
quick turnover, intense. We rehearse for 3 days and then we perform 4 times. It is one of the busiest orchestras in the world, and to be able to play, at that level is a dream come true.
You have a lot of playing to do. Do you still practice?
Yes, I have to practice. Sometimes in the orchestra, you're not really able to hear yourself that well. It's great to really go back to scales or etudes or things that were part of my warm-up. I still do them today. So yes, practice is still important.
Did you play on the orchestra truck that the New York Philharmonic had going around the city during the pandemic?
I didn't get a chance to play on it, but several of my colleagues did. It was called the bandwagon, the Philharmonic bandwagon.
Yes.
And I think that it was nice to connect with people during the pandemic when we were all unable to connect with each other, as musicians.
There are 2 violin sections in an orchestra, the first violins and the second violins. What determines someone playing in the first or the second section?
Some orchestras rotate consistently first and seconds throughout the season. In ours, we are fixed first and seconds, but there's generally some rotation anyway. But at this point, when you enter, you're a section player. It's not like you're labeled first or second.
Okay.
But you do start out in the seconds when you're initially there. So an internal audition takes place to fill a chair on the first.
Has the New York Philharmonic changed over the years that you've been there? Have you noticed any changes?
Yes, it's always changing. I have to say that I feel like it's constantly in motion. The makeup of the personnel changes just like very slowly over time, and depending on who the music director is, it could take a certain direction or have a different feel about the atmosphere. And I think that it's not that one is better than the other. It's really that each is his own person. Like as a music director, each person as an individual is putting their own, personality into the job.
Does it still have that excitement when you walk out onto the stage and the audience is there every time you do it?
For me, it's still there, yes. I can't help but be aware of living, breathing people being in the seats in front of me, and sometimes I do kind of look out and there's a little eye contact, or after we're playing when there's applause, I kind of feel a connection. And that's what we missed most in this pandemic. When we got back in front of for our first live audience, I couldn't believe how emotional we all were about how fortunate we were.
I think many people don't understand that the audience is really part of the process. That there is a symbiotic relationship, and certain audiences are different than others.
We're making sounds, but if there's nobody out there to listen to us, it isn't the same thing. When you're in a performance, you are starting, and then there's no stopping. There are no do-overs. The show must go on.
Yes.
And whatever happens, and most of the time it's magical. It's just, we're so lucky.
So finally, I have to ask you about your violin. Is it very old?
It is old.
What can you tell me about your violin?
It was made around 1700, so that gives you a clue that it's quite old, and it is from the city of Saluzzo. Saluzzo in Italy, yes. It somehow seems to have gone through a lot of repairs over the hundreds of years. It may have been smashed in at one point because there's many cracks on the.
Yes.
But they're fixed cracks, and and
it sounds wonderful.
It sounds great to me. Yes. I fell in love with it, and I also think that it is something I play every day. Almost every single day. So it is almost
part of you.
Part of me. It's also something utilitarian about it. If the violin is not being played and if the strings aren't ringing regularly, over a period of months, it starts to close up, and it needs to be coaxed back out of its hibernation.
When you begin playing the violin, and even as you move up, you get a violin in a case with a bow. But bow A is not bow B, and sometimes your bow can be almost as valuable as your violin.
Yes, but there are some older bows with famous historic names, I would say French names most of all. Vorin, Sartori, Picot. I think that a lot of those tend to also, as many upper level violins, they tend to be out of reach of students and players and even people like me. I actually have a modern bow, which is a copy of a Picot, and it is a beautifully made bow by Jose de Cunha. And I'm very happy with it. It really does make a difference, the pairing of a certain bow with a certain violin. And they have to be, the right balance. There's a certain curve, there's a certain width of the wood, and they call it the camber, and how much the whole thing weighs. It is an art form unto itself. It's just.
How often do you get your bow rehaired?
I have to get my bow rehaired optimally every 3 to 5 months.
Woo!
Because we play so much.
Yes.
And I really think that the bow hair being the tail of a horse, it gets worn out. Each hair does have like this tiny frictional element, because you kind of try to raise the friction of the bow hair by rubbing rosin on it, tree resin. And you'll see people doing that when they unpack, and that grips the string, and it is all about the balance of and the quality of good hair, and then having a good bow rehair and a good enough bow to pull the nicest step sound that you can find. And I never realized it until I was really in my 20s that bows made a difference, that it really is a whole thing in itself.
What would you recommend to a parent who had a child who thought they might like to play the violin?
Well, there are many good music schools or private music teachers. Maybe they could ask around and find the local music school. The bigger picture is really important. I think that what my parents did was part of my education. The music playing in the house, the love of music was there. It was palpable. And I love this memory of how my dad actually loved country music. Like Randy Travis and the like, and there's a really comforting simplicity about country music that I think he liked, and he was always whistling, and I felt that kind of odd but kind of cool at the same time. Yeah. And the fact is, my mom bought me my first Beatles album. I think she was trying to get me to kind of not be so snobby about classical music as a nerdy kid or something. Right. But I appreciated all kinds of music, at a time that was good to really do that. It feeds all of the senses, and it helps you in your rhythm, and pop music, it helps you with your rhythm, for example. And another memory that just popped into my head was the old Tower Records store in Hollywood. Was a treat, Every few months we would get to go there and pick out an album, or maybe to study a violin piece. But I remember the LP of Jascha Heifetz playing Tchaikovsky Concerto, and I would put the repeat button on my little phonograph there on the stereo and fall asleep to Tchaikovsky Concerto. And I think it was just sort of going on all night or something. I don't know if there was an auto shut-off at some point, but I just remember loving those tutti sections. And now I'm in the tutti section playing those big, triumphant melodies of Tchaikovsky. It's
there probably is somebody who's going to be listening to the New York Philharmonic recording of this and thinking the same thing 30 years from now.
Yes.
That they're part of this. Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I just hope that more and more people will, be playing music in their homes and in their cars, just keeping it within arm's reach.
Thank you. We do too.
Thanks.
So, thank you.